On the evening of January 24th, 2023, emergency services were called to a home in Duxbury, Massachusetts. A mother had been found outside the house after falling from a second-story window. Inside the home, emergency responders discovered her 3 young children: 5-year-old Cora, 3-year-old Dawson, and 8-month-old Callen. Cora and Dawson were pronounced dead that night. Callen was taken to Boston Children's Hospital but died several days later. The woman outside the house was their mother, Lindsay Clancy. What investigators would uncover over the following hours, days and months would become one of the most disturbing and closely watched criminal cases in Massachusetts. But there was another question almost as shocking as the deaths themselves. Was Lindsay Clancy a mother who deliberately murdered her children? Or was she suffering from a severe psychiatric disorder that had destroyed her ability to understand what she was doing? That question is now being decided in court. Before January 24th, Lindsay Clancy was known as a mother and a labor and delivery nurse, living with her husband, Patrick, and their 3 children in Duxbury. According to the defense, Lindsay's mental health had deteriorated dramatically during the month before the killings. Her lawyers argue that she was suffering from serious psychiatric illness, including postpartum psychosis and an underlying bipolar disorder, and that her treatment was inadequate. The prosecution does not dispute that Clancy had mental health problems. Prosecutors argue that having a psychiatric condition does not mean she was incapable of deliberately killing her children, and that distinction is at the center of her trial. In the weeks leading up to January 24th, 2023, Clancy had contact with multiple mental health professionals. She was prescribed psychiatric medications, sought treatment, and spent a short period receiving inpatient care. The defense says these efforts demonstrate that Lindsay was desperately trying to get help. The prosecution, however, has focused on evidence, suggesting that she retained the ability to make decisions and organize her actions. One particularly important area of evidence has been Lindsay's internet activity. Prosecutors have presented search evidences concerning subjects, including hallucinations, psychosis, suicide methods, and medication side effects. The defense has a different interpretation. Its argument is that these searches are evidence of a woman desperately trying to understand what was happening to her mind, not evidence that she was calmly planning to murder her children. In the afternoon of January 24th, the husband, Patrick, was reported to have left the family home to run an errand to pick up food and medication from a pharmacy. According to prosecutors, Lindsay used the period when he was away to kill the children. The prosecution alleges that the killings involved exercise bans and that Lindsay then attempted to take her own life by jumping from a second-story window. When Patrick eventually returned home, he discovered Lindsay outside. He then went inside and found the children in their horrifying state. His 911 call became one of the most emotional pieces of evidence presented at trial. The medical examiner has already determined that Cora and Dawson died from asphyxia, while Callen died from complications of asphyxia. Initially, investigators were confronted with a horrifying scene and a mother who had apparently attempted suicide. But investigators soon developed probable cause that Lindsay had strangled the children. In September 2023, a grand jury indicted her on 3 counts of murder and 3 counts of strangulation. In October, Clancy pleaded not guilty to the charges. The prosecution's theory was clear. These were deliberate killings. But the defense was preparing to argue something very different. This is perhaps the most important part of the entire case. The defense says Lindsay was experiencing postpartum psychosis. Postpartum psychosis is a rare but extremely serious psychiatric emergency that can involve hallucinations, delusions, severe confusion, and a loss of contact with reality. The defense says Lindsay had experienced hallucinations and believes she was receiving commands from voices. Her attorneys argue that her psychiatric condition was worsened by inadequate treatment and medication changes. However, the prosecution disputes the interpretation of her behavior and argues that she was capable of planning and carrying out the killings. This distinction matters enormously. The question before the jury isn't simply, was Lindsay mentally ill? The question is whether her mental condition made her not criminally responsible for what happened. Prosecutors have argued that Lindsay planned the killings. One important piece of their argument concerns the timing of Patrick's departure. They argued that Lindsay deliberately arranged for her husband to leave the house, creating an opportunity when she would be alone with the children. They have also pointed to internet searches and other behavior that they say demonstrate preparation rather than psychosis. More recently, prosecutors have revived the argument that Lindsay's apparent suicide attempt may not necessarily prove that she was psychotic at the time of the killings. Their position is essentially this: Lindsay may have been struggling psychologically, but she nevertheless knew what she was doing, and prosecutors argue she deliberately did it. The defense tells a very different story. They describe Lindsay as a desperately ill mother who repeatedly sought help as her mental health deteriorated. Her attorneys have criticized the care she received from mental health professionals. One psychiatrist, Dr. Jennifer Tufts, treated Lindsay from September 2022 until shortly before the killings. Tufts diagnosed anxiety and adjustment disorder rather than bipolar disorder or postpartum psychosis. She testified that Lindsay never told her she was hearing voices or planning to harm her children. The defense has argued that the treatment Lindsay received failed to recognize the severity of her condition. And that raises a disturbing question. Could this tragedy have been prevented if Lindsay's psychiatric illness had been recognized earlier? At the center of the story is Patrick Clancy. He was Lindsay's husband and the father of all 3 children. His testimony has given jurors a direct account of the family's life and the events of January 24th. He also made the 911 call after returning home. It is difficult to separate the criminal case from the human tragedy. Whatever the jury ultimately decides about Lindsay's criminal responsibility, 3 children lost their lives. Cora was 5, Dawson was 3, and Callen was only 8 months old. While the prosecution is attempting to prove that the killings were deliberate and that Lindsay was legally responsible for her actions, Lindsay Clancy has pleaded not guilty and is relying on a defense of lack of criminal responsibility. The trial is still ongoing. That means the final verdict has not yet been determined. The Lindsay Clancy case has become more complicated than a simple story of crime and punishment. There are really 2 questions. The first is, did Lindsay Clancy kill her 3 children? She does not dispute that she was responsible for their deaths. The second question is much harder. What was happening inside Lindsay Clancy's mind when she did it? Was she deliberately carrying out a plan? Or was she experiencing a catastrophic psychiatric episode in which her perception of reality had fundamentally broken down? The prosecution says the evidence points toward deliberate action. The defense says the same evidence can be understood as the behavior of someone experiencing severe psychosis. And ultimately, that is what the jury must decide. At the end, 3 children died on January 24th, 2023. Cora, Dawson, and Callen. Their deaths left a family shattered and raised difficult questions about mental illness, postpartum psychiatric care, criminal responsibility, and the limits of what medicine and the legal system can recognize before tragedy occurs. Lindsay Clancy is now on trial. She remains presumed innocent unless and until the prosecution proves the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. And because the trial is still underway, the final chapter of this case has not yet been written. Whatever the verdict, the story of Lindsay Clancy is ultimately also the story of 3 children whose lives ended far too soon, and of a family whose lives would change forever.